How do you decide the direction a character goes in? Say we have Mona, who's deathly afraid of snakes. In a traditional hero's journey, Mona would have to confront her fear and emerge strengthened, triumphant, and then become unafraid. But unless you're going for that, that isn't how it has to go. Mona could also decide to just accept that she's afraid, or to take precautions to avoid dealing with snakes ever again. She might even attempt to get rid of her fear and fail. So, naturally, when you're dealing with a character whose path is open-ended, there's only one way to think about their evolution. What fits the theme of the story? Going back to Mona, if the theme of our story is acceptance, then her coming to terms with her phobia and accepting that she can change, and that doesn't impede on her ability to lead a good life, would fit perfectly. On the other hand, if we were writing a novel that explored the issues that emerge as a result of having a powerful phobia, then following Mona as her life falls apart and she becomes increasingly unstable makes a lot more sense. Hell, we could even choose people don't change as a theme, and then spend the whole time reinforcing the grim idea that despite her efforts, the fear will never, ever fade away. In short, the way to decide what direction your character grows in is to follow the theme. The real difficulty for many, I think, myself included, is to figure out what the theme of their story actually is, because sometimes it's not what the author intended it to be. Like you might sit down and decide to write a story about redemption. You come up with the main character that fits just right, or so you think. Because by the time you can even get halfway, the character has changed so much on their own that you end up with something completely different. And that's not a bad thing. I think your character speaking through you is a good indication that you're onto something. It's just that that something might not be the story you planned out before you actually started writing. It's a good idea to look at the story as it turned out and ask yourself, why did things happen this way? What ideas does my story reinforce? Careful who you trust? People don't change? Revenge is best served cold? The good life is a simple life? You get the idea. This isn't always easy to figure out, and even some of the best novels might have some thematic inconsistencies. And it goes without saying that a highly complex story might have multiple themes. While A Song of Ice and Fire has a lot of themes, ranging from stuff like family uber alles and trust no one, the one that stands out to me most is the importance of perspective. That's something you not only see in how the characters are written, in the sense that they struggle to make sense of what others are thinking, but all the way down to how the story is structured in different point of view chapters. Which brings me to the other important piece of advice. In a highly complex narrative, with a lot of characters, each character will follow their own arc that has its own thematic importance. Now, the themes of these different arcs obviously intersect, and they're all subordinate to the central theme of the grand narrative. A character who does good deeds because it's right and ultimately gets karmically rewarded for it might be a great story if you're writing a moralizing work or one focused on religious values. It would not, however, fit in the slightest in the Song of Ice and Fire. In fact, Ned's entire arc in the Game of Thrones is a statement against that kind of thinking. A Song of Ice and Fire is not about heroes. It's a story about grey characters in a grey world, struggling against one another's limited perspectives infused by subjective moral values. It's not a world in which good guys can't succeed, but good guys can only succeed by being as cunning and intelligent as their opponents. Whether or not you think every character or event in the Song of Ice and Fire is effective in establishing these themes and following through is a different story. After all, even George is only human, and sometimes the organic nature of storytelling might demand something that doesn't fit the perfect mold of the theme you set out with. So if you're about to embark on writing your novel or looking to fix things that you feel aren't working, ask yourself, number 1, what is the central theme of this work? Number 2, what are some additional themes? Number 3, what themes do the arcs of the most important characters follow? If you're starting out from scratch, then building your character arcs around the additional themes in the story to expand on the central theme might be a useful starting point. As with the karmic reward example, the most important part you gotta remember is that the subordinate themes cannot go against your central theme. For example, you can't have the theme of crime doesn't pay, but then have one of your characters be a criminal that gets away with everything. It would detract and undermine the very thing you set out to accomplish. Most of the time we have a good gut instinct for what feels right and what doesn't. Just be careful that your affection for a character doesn't get in the way of their arc coming to the appropriate end. Going back to Crime Doesn't Pay, if your story featured a diverse cast of criminals who are all destined to get punished in the end in one way or another, then singling out one by offering her an unearned chance at redemption or leaving her fate ambiguous won't strike readers as fair. One of the worst feelings as a reader is the realization that the fates of the characters don't depend on their actions, the unfolding plot, or even the themes, but purely on the author's favoritism. It basically renders the agency of the characters irrelevant and drains away all tension. This is also why you'll see a lot of people complain about novels or movies not making sense. Disappointed readers and viewers will often look for reasons to explain why they aren't satisfied with the story, and go for plot holes and the like. But the real culprit is emotional dissonance. Their tastes and values led them to believe that what they're watching or reading could only really end one way, till it ended very differently. This is made a lot worse by an author who has no idea what they're doing, and are basically playing favorites with some characters and coming up with ass-pull after ass-pull just to keep them around. Ultimately, what I want to say with all of this is that you'll know where a character needs to go, and what arc they need to follow based on everything else about your story. If what you end up writing doesn't feel right, one very simple reason could be that you didn't correctly judge the compatibility between the characters and the themes, and what resulted is a Frankenstein abomination. But you have to remember that there's no starting point that's set in stone. If you already know what you want to write, then yeah, choose your theme, your setting, and then come up with the characters in their respective arcs. But if you came up with a character first, then take some time to figure out their story and use that to discover the central theme. It's not about where you start. It's about ensuring that everything fuses together in a way that feels organic. As always, thank you for listening, and good luck.